Jake Morrison stared at his reflection in the small mirror attached to his dorm wall. His brown hair stuck up at odd angles, and dark circles under his green eyes showed how little sleep he had gotten. 3 months into his exchange program at the Galactic University of Proxima Station, and he still felt like a fish out of water. He grabbed his data pad and headed toward the Xenolinguistics building. The hallways buzzed with alien students hurrying to their morning classes. A group of tall, blue-skinned creatures with 4 arms chatted in musical tones that his translation device picked up as gossip about weekend plans. Near the elevator, a being that looked like a walking tree swayed gently while reading from a glowing tablet. Jake pressed the button for the 15th floor and waited. When he first arrived at Proxima Station, everything had amazed him. The floating buildings, the artificial gravity that worked differently on each level, the food dispensers that could create any meal from basic molecules. Now, after 12 weeks, it all felt normal. Well, almost normal. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime. Jake walked down the corridor toward classroom 1547, where Dr. Keth Morey taught advanced universal communication theory. The class focused on how different species understood and organized their worlds through language. Jake pushed open the door and found his usual seat in the 3rd row. The classroom looked like an amphitheater designed by someone who had never seen humans before. The seats adjusted automatically to fit each student's body shape. Some desks floated in midair for species that preferred hovering. Others were filled with thick green liquid for aquatic beings. His classmates were already settling in. Zixthara, the crystalline student from the Andorian system, sat in the front row. Her body looked like a sculpture made of clear, singing glass. When she was happy, she glowed with soft blue light. When frustrated, she turned red and made sounds like wind chimes in a storm. Next to her sat Bloom of 7 Suns, whose real name Jake could never pronounce properly. She looked like a giant flower with a face, but she was actually one of the smartest beings Jake had ever met. Her species communicated through color changes and scents. The translation device on Jake's desk worked overtime during her presentations, turning her rainbow displays into words he could understand. Behind them, Kix balanced on his single leg while reviewing notes on his tablet. His people came from a high-gravity world where standing on one leg was normal. He had 3 eyes arranged in a triangle pattern on his face, which let him see in all directions at once. The door slid shut as Dr. Keth Morey entered the room. The professor stood 7 feet tall on 6 thin legs that moved like a spider's. His head was round and covered in soft gray fur. 2 large compound eyes dominated his face and 4 smaller arms extended from his chest. Each arm held a different teaching tool. "Good morning, students," Dr. Keth Morey said. His voice came from a small opening near the top of his head. "Today we will explore categorical thinking across species. Each of you will describe a creature from your home world that shows how your people relate to nature." Jake opened his notebook and clicked his pen. This was the kind of assignment he usually enjoyed. Earth had so many amazing animals that most aliens had never heard of. "Who would like to begin?" Dr. Keith Morey asked. Kix raised one of his 3 hands. "I will speak of the stone swimmers from my world. They are creatures that eat rocks and turn them into beautiful crystals. My people see them as artists of the deep earth." The professor nodded approvingly. "Excellent. The stone swimmers represent transformation and beauty in your culture. Who is next?" Bloom of 7 Suns changed to a bright yellow color, which meant she wanted to speak. "I choose the wind dancers of my home forests. They are tiny beings that ride air currents and pollinate our great trees. They show the connection between all living things." "Very good," Dr. Keth Morey said. "Connection and interdependence. These examples show how different species value different relationships with their environments." Zixithara's crystalline body chimed softly. "Professor, I wish to describe the harmony beasts of my world. They sing in perfect chord progressions that help our young learn music theory. They represent the mathematical beauty of sound." Dr. Keth Morey's compound eyes glittered with interest. "Fascinating. Music as a bridge between mathematics and nature. Excellent observation." Jake raised his hand. He had been thinking about what animal to choose. Lions seemed too obvious. Everyone expected humans to talk about big, dangerous predators. Dolphins might be interesting, but explaining echolocation would take too long. Dogs were too simple. Then, he remembered a nature documentary he had watched back on Earth. It showed massive gray animals living in African rivers. The narrator had called them one of the most dangerous animals on the continent, even though they were plant eaters. "Student Morrison," Dr. Kethmori said, "please share your selection." Jake cleared his throat. "I choose the hippopotamus." The word hung in the air like a physical thing. Jake looked around the classroom, expecting his classmates to lean forward, with interest like they had for the other presentations. Instead, he saw something he had never seen before. Every alien in the room had gone completely still. Zixthara's crystalline body, which had been glowing with soft blue light, suddenly turned black as coal. Her musical chiming stopped completely, leaving an eerie silence. Bloom of Seven Suns changed from her normal green color to a deep, blood red that Jake's translation device labeled as extreme alarm. The air around her filled with a sharp, chemical smell that made his nose burn. Kix's three eyes all focused on Jake with laser intensity. His single leg began trembling so hard that his whole body shook. Even the floating students higher up in the classroom seemed to sink toward the floor, as if they were trying to hide. Dr. Kethmori froze in place like a statue. All 6 of his legs locked rigid, and his 4 teaching arms stopped moving. His compound eyes fixed on Jake with an expression that looked like pure terror. The silence stretched on and on. Jake could hear his own heartbeat in his ears. The air filtration system hummed quietly in the background. Someone in the hallway outside laughed at a joke, the sound muffled by the closed door. Jake looked around the room again. Every single being was staring at him, like he had just announced he was carrying a nuclear bomb. Jake said quietly. "Is there a problem?" Dr. Kethmori's voice, when he finally spoke, sounded different, higher-pitched, strained. "Student Morrison, could you please repeat what you just said?" Jake frowned. "Hippopotamus? It's an animal. From Earth. They're large mammals that live in rivers and lakes in Africa. They're actually semi-aquatic, which means they spend time both in water and on land." The professor's legs began to shake. One of his smaller arms dropped the tablet it was holding. The device clattered on the floor, the sound sharp and loud, in the silent room. "You said, hippopotamus," Dr. Kethmori repeated slowly, like he was tasting each syllable. "Yes, sir," Jake said. "They're really interesting animals. Most people think they're peaceful because they're herbivores, but they're actually extremely territorial and dangerous. They have huge teeth and can run surprisingly fast both in water and on land." Zixthara made a sound Jake had never heard before. It was like breaking glass mixed with a scream. His translation device gave up trying to convert it into words and just displayed error messages. Bloom of Seven Suns released another cloud of the sharp-smelling chemical. This time, Jake's eyes began to water. Dr. Kethmori took a step backward, then another. "Students," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "I need everyone except Morrison to leave the classroom immediately." The alien students didn't need to be told twice. Kix hopped toward the door as fast as his single leg could carry him. Zixthara moved like liquid light, flowing around desks and chairs. Bloom of Seven Suns changed to a bright yellow color that Jake's device translated as urgent retreat and practically ran for the exit. Within 30 seconds, Jake sat alone in the empty classroom with his professor, who was still staring at him like he might explode at any moment. "Did I just accidentally start an intergalactic incident by mentioning a hippo?" Jake asked. Dr. Kethmori stood frozen for what felt like forever. His 6 legs remained locked in place and his compound eyes never left Jake's face. The silence in the empty classroom grew heavier with each passing second. Finally, the professor moved. He reached for his communication device with one of his forearms, but his movements were slow and careful, like he was afraid any sudden motion might trigger something terrible. "Student Morrison," Dr. Kethmori said, his voice still strained, "I need you to remain very calm and answer my questions exactly. Do you understand?" Jake nodded, though he felt anything but calm. Sure, Professor, but I still don't understand what's wrong. Did I pronounce something incorrectly? Is hippopotamus a bad word in some alien language? Dr. Kethamori pressed several buttons on his communication device. Jake heard electronic beeping sounds, followed by urgent voices speaking in languages his translator couldn't identify. No, Student Morrison, the professor said. The word itself is not the problem. The problem is what that word represents. He paused, seeming to gather his courage. Tell me more about these hippopotamus creatures. How large are they? Jake shrugged. Pretty big. Adult males can weigh up to 4,000 pounds. That's about the same as a small car. They're maybe 13 feet long and 5 feet tall at the shoulder. Dr. Kethamori's legs wobbled. He had to grab onto his desk to keep from falling over. 4,000 pounds, he repeated weakly. And you said they live in water? Rivers and lakes, mostly, Jake confirmed. They spend most of the day in water to keep their skin from drying out. But they come onto land at night to eat grass. They can hold their breath underwater for up to 5 minutes. The professor made a choking sound. They hunt underwater? Hunt? Jake laughed. No, they don't hunt. They're herbivores. They only eat plants, mostly grass and some fruits. Dr. Kethamori stared at him. You're telling me that these massive water-dwelling creatures eat plants? Yeah, that's right. About 80 pounds of grass per day. Jake was starting to feel like he was in some weird dream. Professor, why is this so shocking? I mean, elephants are bigger than hippos, and they eat plants too. At the word elephants, Dr. Kethamori's communication device started beeping frantically. Voices on the other end grew louder and more urgent. Student Morrison, the professor said, pressing more buttons on his device. I'm going to ask you to stop mentioning earth animals for a moment. Please. Jake held up his hands. Okay, but can you please explain what's going on? My classmates looked like they'd seen a ghost. Dr. Kethamori walked to the front of his desk and activated the room's holographic display system. The air above his desk shimmered, and a 3-dimensional image appeared. Jake leaned forward to get a better look. The creature in the hologram looked exactly like a hippopotamus. Same barrel-shaped body, same short legs, same massive head with tiny ears and eyes. But something was wrong with the scale. According to the size indicators floating next to the image, this hippo was enormous. The length measurement read 200 meters. This, Dr. Kethamori said, his voice barely above a whisper, is what we call an ancient devourer. Jake stared at the giant hippo hologram. That looks like a hippo, but it's huge, like really huge. 67 million years ago, Dr. Kethamori continued. Creatures exactly like this one nearly destroyed all intelligent life in our galaxy. They appeared suddenly, spread across thousands of worlds, and consumed everything in their path. The hologram changed to show a star map. Red dots appeared on planet after planet, spreading like a disease across the galaxy's spiral arms. As Jake watched, entire star systems turned red. They reproduced faster than any creature we had ever encountered, the professor explained. A single pair could produce hundreds of offspring in one breeding cycle. They ate constantly, stripping entire worlds of all plant life within months. Jake felt a chill run down his spine. But the hippos on Earth aren't like that. I mean, they do reproduce, but not that fast. And they definitely don't strip worlds bare. Dr. Kethamori's compound, eyes fixed on him again. Student Morrison, are you absolutely certain that these hippopotamus creatures exist on your homeworld? Of course I'm certain, Jake said. I've seen them in zoos. There are nature documentaries about them. They live wild in Africa. The professor's communication device beeped again. This time Jake could hear panic in the alien voices coming through the speaker. How many of them are there? Dr. Kethamori asked. Jake thought for a moment. I'm not sure of the exact number. Maybe 100,000? 150,000? Something like that. Dr. Kethamori sat down heavily in his chair. All 6 legs seemed to give out at once. 150,000, he repeated. Ancient devourers. On a single world. With intelligent life. Professor, you keep calling them ancient devourers, but they're just hippos, Jake said. They're dangerous, sure, but they're not world-ending monsters. Dangerous? Dr. Kethmori leaned forward. In what way are they dangerous? Jake counted, on his fingers. Well, they're very territorial. They don't like it when other animals or people get too close to their water. They have huge teeth like the size of bananas. They can bite a canoe in half. They're also surprisingly fast. People think they're slow because they look fat, but they can run 30 miles per hour on land. The holographic display changed again. Now it showed the hippo's mouth open, displaying massive teeth. Dr. Kethmori made that choking sound again. 30 miles per hour, the professor said faintly, with teeth the size of bananas. Yeah, and they're really aggressive during mating season, or when they have babies. Actually, they're pretty much aggressive all the time. They kill more people in Africa than lions do. Dr. Kethmori's forearms all moved at once, frantically pressing buttons on multiple devices. They kill people regularly. Well, yeah. If you get between a hippo and the water, you're in trouble. If you surprise one on land at night, you're in trouble. If you get too close to a mother with babies, you're definitely in trouble. Jake paused. But it's not like they hunt humans, they just don't like being bothered. The communication device erupted with noise. Jake could hear multiple voices all talking at once in different languages. Even through the translation barrier, he could tell they were all panicked. Dr. Kethmori stood up again, his legs shaking. Student Morrison, I need to ask you something very important. How do your people survive on the same planet as these creatures? Jake blinked. We just avoid them. Don't go swimming in rivers where hippos live. Don't build houses too close to hippo territory. Use boats with motors instead of paddles so you can get away fast. Basic common sense. Common sense, Dr. Kethmori repeated slowly. Right, I mean, it's not like they're everywhere. They only live in certain parts of Africa. Most humans never see a wild hippo in their entire lives. The professor's communication device made a new sound, like an alarm. Red lights began flashing on his desk. Student Morrison, Dr. Kethmori said, I'm afraid this conversation is far from over. The Galactic Consortium's Emergency Council wants to speak with you, immediately. Jake felt his stomach drop. The what now? The governing body for this sector of the galaxy. They handle threats to interstellar security. Dr. Kethmori's voice grew even more strained. Apparently, the existence of ancient devourers on an inhabited world qualifies as such a threat. Before Jake could respond, the classroom door slid open. 3 figures in dark uniforms entered, moving with military precision. They wore full coverage, helmets that hid their faces, but Jake could see weapons attached to their belts. Student Morrison? The lead figure spoke through a voice modulator that made them sound robotic. You need to come with us. Now. Jake looked at Dr. Kethmori, hoping his professor would say this was all some kind of joke or misunderstanding. Instead, the professor just nodded sadly. Go with them, Student Morrison. And please, try not to mention any other Earth animals until we can figure out what we're dealing with. As the security officers escorted Jake out of the classroom, he couldn't help but wonder what would happen if he told them about crocodiles, or sharks, or bears. Maybe it was better not to find out. The security officers walked Jake through corridors he had never seen before. These hallways were different from the bright, cheerful paths between classrooms. The walls were gray metal, and red warning lights blinked at regular intervals. Jake's footsteps echoed loudly in the silence. They stopped at a heavy door marked with symbols Jake couldn't read. One of the officers pressed his hand against a scanner, and the door slid open with a hiss. Beyond it was a room that looked like something from a military command center. Screens covered every wall showing star maps, ship positions, and data, streams Jake didn't understand. In the center of the room stood a large table with chairs arranged around it. Some chairs were normal height for humans. Others were much taller or lower, designed for different alien body types. Sit there, the lead officer said, pointing to a chair at the far end of the table. Don't touch anything. Don't move unless we tell you to. Jake sat down and waited. The officers took positions near the door, their hands resting on their weapons. The silence felt heavy and threatening, After what seemed like hours, but was probably only minutes, people began entering the room. The first was a woman in a blue uniform with gold stripes on her shoulders. She had short black hair and tired-looking eyes. Behind her came a man in a similar uniform, followed by several others Jake assumed were also human. Then the aliens arrived. Jake recognized some of the species from around campus, but these beings moved with an authority that student aliens didn't have. A tall, insect-like creature with 4 arms and bright green skin took one of the larger chairs. Something that looked like a floating jellyfish hovered over a specially designed seat. A being covered in silver fur sat across from Jake, its 6 eyes watching him carefully. The woman in the blue uniform sat down directly across from Jake. "Mr. Morrison, I'm Captain Lisa Hayes, Earth Diplomatic Corps. This is Commander Pete Davis, also from Earth. We're here to help you through this situation." Jake felt a wave of relief wash over him. Finally, people who spoke his language and might actually explain what was happening. "Captain Hayes," Jake said, "I have no idea what's going on. I mentioned hippos in class, and everyone freaked out. Now I'm sitting in what looks like a war room." Captain Hayes exchanged glances with Commander Davis. "Mr. Morrison, what we're about to tell you is going to sound unbelievable. 3 hours ago, we received an emergency transmission from the Galactic Consortium. They believe Earth may be harboring creatures that nearly destroyed galactic civilization." The tall, insect-like alien leaned forward. When it spoke, its voice sounded like wind blowing through metal tubes. "Student Morrison, I am Commander Zektar of the Consortium Defense Force. We need you to understand the gravity of this situation." Jake nodded, though he still felt completely lost. Commander Zektar activated a control panel in front of him. The air above the table shimmered, and a holographic display appeared. Jake saw the same image Dr. Kethamori had shown him earlier, the giant hippopotamus-like creature. "This is an ancient devourer," Commander Zektar said. 67 million years ago, these creatures appeared in our galaxy. We still don't know where they came from. They might have traveled from another galaxy, or they might have evolved on some distant world we never found. The hologram changed to show a peaceful-looking planet covered in green forests and blue oceans. This was Kepler Prime, home to the Verdian civilization. They were peaceful plant-eaters, much like your professor described these hippopotamus creatures. Jake watched as red dots appeared on the planet's surface. The dots spread quickly, and the green areas began turning brown. The ancient devourers arrived on Kepler Prime in small numbers, Commander Zektar continued. At first, the Verdians thought they were just another species of herbivore. They were wrong. The hologram showed the planet's surface in more detail. Where the red dots had spread, nothing green remained. The forests were gone. The grasslands were bare dirt. Even the algae in the oceans had disappeared. In less than 2 standard years, the ancient devourers had consumed every plant on Kepler Prime. The Verdian civilization collapsed. Billions died. Jake stared at the dead planet in the hologram. But hippos don't do that. They eat grass, but they don't eat all the grass. They move around, graze in different areas. The floating jellyfish-like being spoke next. Its voice sounded like water bubbling. "Student Morrison, we have records of over 300 worlds that suffered the same fate. The ancient devourers would arrive, reproduce at impossible speeds, and consume everything." Captain Hayes leaned forward. "Jake, how fast do hippos reproduce on Earth?" Jake thought for a moment. "Pretty slowly, actually. Female hippos are pregnant for about 8 months, and they usually only have one baby at a time. Maybe twins occasionally, and they don't start having babies until they're around 6 years old." The aliens in the room exchanged looks of confusion. Commander Zektar's forearms moved restlessly. "That's not consistent with our records," the silver-furred alien said. Its voice was high-pitched and musical. "Ancient devourers could produce dozens of offspring in a single breeding cycle. They reached reproductive maturity within months of birth." "Well, Earth hippos definitely don't do that," Jake said. "A hippo might have 4 or 5 babies in its entire lifetime, spread out over many years." Commander Davis, who had been quiet until now, spoke up. "Jake, you mentioned that hippos are dangerous. Can you explain how?" Jake looked around the room at all the anxious alien faces. "They're territorial. If you get too close to their space, they might charge at you. They're big and heavy, so getting hit by one would be like getting hit by a truck. And they have large teeth that can bite through small boats. But they don't actively hunt other creatures, Captain Hayes asked. No, not at all. They might attack if they feel threatened, but they don't chase down prey or anything like that. They just want to be left alone to eat grass and soak in the water. The holographic display changed again. Now it showed battle scenes. Alien spaceships firing at massive creatures on planet surfaces. The creatures in the battles looked exactly like hippos, but they were the size of buildings. The ancient Devourer War lasted nearly 3,000 years, Commander Zektar explained. We lost billions of lives. Entire species went extinct. In the end, we only won by driving them to the edge of the galaxy and setting up a barrier of automated defense stations. Jake watched the holographic battles with growing amazement. These things were really that dangerous? They were the greatest threat our galaxy had ever faced, the jellyfish being said. They showed no fear, no hesitation. They would attack any creature that tried to stop them from feeding. Even our most powerful weapons barely slowed them down. But the hippos on Earth aren't like that at all, Jake protested. I mean, they're tough, but people hunt them sometimes. With regular guns. If someone really wanted to kill a hippo, they could do it. The room fell silent. All the aliens stared at Jake with expressions of disbelief. You're saying, Commander Zektar said slowly, that individual humans can kill these creatures? Well, yeah. It's not easy and it's dangerous, but it happens. Mostly it's park rangers who have to put down problem hippos or hunters with special licenses. Captain Hayes looked at Commander Davis. Jake, are you telling us that humans regularly interact with these animals? Not regularly, but it happens. There are wildlife reserves where rangers work around hippos all the time. Tourists take boat trips to see them. Some people even keep them in zoos. The last sentence hit the room like a bomb. Several aliens made choking sounds. The silver-furred being actually fell out of its chair. Zoos? Commander Zektar's voice rose to a higher pitch. You keep ancient devourers in captivity? For entertainment? Jake nodded. There are probably hippos in zoos all over the world. Kids go to see them on school trips. The floating jellyfish creature began pulsing rapidly with different colors. Jake's translation device struggled to keep up with what seemed to be the alien equivalent of hyperventilation. Captain Hayes rubbed her forehead. Jake, I think we need to call Earth immediately. The situation just got a lot more complicated. 3 days later, Jake found himself standing on the banks of the Zambezi River in Africa, surrounded by the most heavily armed group of beings he had ever seen. The morning sun beat down on the muddy water, and the air buzzed with insects. Somewhere in the distance, a bird called out with a sound that reminded Jake of home. The alien delegation had insisted on seeing these ancient devourers with their own eyes. Captain Hayes had tried to convince them that video footage would be enough, but Commander Zektar had refused. We must confirm the threat level ourselves, he had said. Too much depends on accurate assessment. Now, 24 hours after the fastest spaceflight in galactic history, they all stood on African soil, watching the river for signs of movement. Commander Zektar wore full battle armor that looked like it could survive a direct hit from a nuclear weapon. His forearms each held a different type of weapon: plasma rifle, sonic disruptor, molecular destabilizer, and something Jake couldn't identify that hummed ominously. The insect-like alien's green skin was pale with fear, and his compound eyes darted constantly between the water and the surrounding landscape. Next to him stood General Vexani, the floating jellyfish creature from the meeting. She had brought her own protection, a shimmering energy shield that surrounded her like a bubble. Inside the shield, she clutched what looked like enough firepower to level a small city. The silver-furred alien, who Jake had learned was called Dr. Morthek, crouched behind a portable barrier that his assistants had set up 30 meters from the water's edge. He peered through a high-powered scope, recording everything on multiple devices. 3 more alien species had joined the expedition. A rock-like being called Commander Stoneshard carried weapons Jake was pretty sure were illegal on most civilized worlds. 2 ethereal creatures that looked like living smoke floated above the group, their forms shifting nervously in the breeze. A turtle-like alien named Captain Shellrock had positioned himself in what looked like a tank, complete with heavy armor plating and rotating gun turrets. On the human side, Captain Hayes and Commander Davis looked almost casual in their light. Body armor and basic sidearms. They had brought Dr. Susan Clark, a wildlife biologist who specialized in African mammals. She carried nothing but a camera and a notebook. "Are you certain this is the correct location?" Commander Zektar asked for the 5th time in 10 minutes. His voice came through the armor's speaker system, making him sound like a robot. Dr. Clark nodded patiently. "This stretch of the Zambezi has one of the largest hippo populations in Africa. If we wait quietly, we should see them soon." "How soon?" General Vexani asked. Her translator made her bubbling voice sound anxious. "Hippos are most active in the morning and evening," Dr. Clark explained. "During the hot part of the day, they stay in the water to keep cool. We should see them surfacing to breathe every few minutes." As if summoned by her words, the water about 50 meters downstream began to ripple. Something large moved beneath, the surface creating a wake that headed toward the riverbank. Every alien weapon in the group immediately swiveled toward the disturbance. Jake heard the high-pitched whine of charging energy cells and the mechanical clicks of safeties being turned off. "Hold your fire," Captain Hayes said quickly. "Remember, we're here to observe, not to start a war." The water erupted as a massive hippo surfaced, water streaming from its gray bulk. It was a large male, probably weighing close to 4,000 pounds. Its small ears twitched as it looked around, and its tiny eyes focused on the group of watchers on the shore. Commander Stoneshard, the rock-like alien, made a sound like grinding stone. Ancient Devourer confirmed. Morphology matches historical records exactly. The hippo yawned, displaying teeth the size of bananas. The sound echoed across the water like a roar. 2 of Commander Zektar's weapons powered up automatically, responding to what their sensors classified as a threat display. The alien general's armor began beeping warnings. "It's just yawning," Dr. Clark said calmly. "Hippos yawn for several reasons. Sometimes they're tired. Sometimes they're showing dominance. Sometimes they're just stretching their jaw muscles." "Threat display," Dr. Morthek muttered from behind his barrier. "Classic Ancient Devourer intimidation behavior." The hippo seemed to consider the strange group of beings watching him. Then, apparently deciding they weren't worth his attention, he sank back into the water until only his eyes and the top of his head remained visible. Is it hunting?" General Vexani whispered. "No," Jake said. "He's just cooling off. Hippos can't sweat, so they have to stay in water during hot weather, or their skin will crack." 3 more hippos surfaced near the first one. 2 looked like females, smaller than the male but still massive. The third was clearly a baby, though baby was relative. It was still the size of a small car. Captain Shellrock's tank turrets tracked the new arrivals. "Multiple contacts, breeding group detected. This confirms accelerated reproduction rates." Dr. Clark shook her head. "Actually, this is a pretty normal family group. The male, probably 2 of his females, and 1 offspring. Hippo families are usually small." "Small?" Commander Zektar's armor amplified his voice. "There are 4 ancient devourers within attack range." "They're not going to attack," Jake said. "Look at them. They're just floating there, enjoying the water." As if to prove his point, one of the female hippos rolled onto her back, exposing her belly to the sun. The baby hippo swam closer to her, looking for milk. "Vulnerable position," Dr. Morthek observed. "This behavior doesn't match our combat records." "That's because they're not in combat," Dr. Clark explained. "They're just living their normal lives, eating, sleeping, raising their young, staying cool in the water." A bird landed on the male hippo's head. The massive animal didn't react at all, letting the small creature peck at insects in his skin. "Symbiotic relationship," Dr. Clark continued. "The birds eat parasites off the hippos and the hippos get cleaned. It's beneficial for both species." The aliens stared in amazement as more birds joined the first one. Soon the male hippo's head was covered with small, colorful birds that chattered and fluttered around him like he was a living perch. "Ancient devourers don't form symbiotic relationships," General Vexani said weakly. They consume everything. Well, these ones clearly do, Captain Hayes pointed out. Maybe your ancient devourers were a different species that just looked similar. Commander Zektar's forearms lowered their weapons slightly. The resemblance is exact, down to the smallest detail. Movement upstream caught Jake's attention. Look, there are more coming. A small herd of hippos was walking along the riverbank, heading for the water. There were maybe 8 or 10 animals, including several babies. They moved slowly, stopping occasionally to grab mouthfuls of grass. They're foraging, Dr. Clark said. See how they're eating? They take a bite, chew it, thoroughly, then move on. They're not stripping the area bare. The aliens watched in fascination as the hippos grazed peacefully. The animals seemed completely unaware of the heavily armed group watching them. When they reached the water, they waded in one by one, sighing contentedly as the cool river embraced them. This behavior makes no sense, Dr. Morthek said. Ancient devourers were aggressive, territorial, and constantly hungry. These creatures appear content. Maybe that's the difference, Jake suggested. These hippos have enough food and water. They don't need to compete desperately for resources. One of the baby hippos swam over to investigate a floating log. When the log turned out to be a crocodile, the baby quickly swam back to its mother. The crocodile, surprisingly, didn't pursue. It just floated there, apparently as uninterested in conflict as the hippos were. Even the apex predators show no aggression, Commander Stoneshard rumbled. Crocodiles and hippos usually avoid each other, Dr. Clark explained. Adult hippos are too big and dangerous for most crocodiles to bother with. Commander Zektar's armor made a soft chiming sound. This is not what we expected, Captain Hayes smiled. Earth has a way of surprising people. These animals have learned to coexist because there's enough for everyone. The male hippo chose that moment to demonstrate exactly why hippos were considered dangerous. Something, probably a fish, bumped into his leg underwater. The hippo's reaction was immediate and violent. He spun around, jaws wide open, and bit down hard enough to create a splash that could be heard 50 meters away. Every alien weapon in the group swung toward the sound. See? Dr. Mortek said triumphantly. Aggressive response to minimal stimulus. But the hippo had already calmed down. Whatever had bothered him was gone, and he went back to floating peacefully with his family. That's just normal territorial behavior, Jake said. He was protecting his space, not trying to destroy everything around him. Normal, Commander Zektar repeated slowly. You consider that normal? For a hippo? Yeah, absolutely. The alien. Commander looked at his fellow officers, then back at the peaceful scene on the river. Perhaps, he said quietly, we need to reconsider what we know about ancient devourers. 6 weeks after the expedition to Earth, Jake Morrison sat in his xenolinguistics classroom, staring at the most unusual sight he had ever seen. His desk was completely covered with gifts. Zixthara had brought a crystal sculpture that sang soft melodies when touched. Bloom of Seven Suns had presented him with seeds from her homeworld that would grow into flowers that changed colors with the seasons. Kix had given him a gravity stabilizer that would let him walk on walls if he ever visited high-gravity worlds. Even students from other classes had left presents. There were rare metals, exotic foods, beautiful artwork, and several items Jake couldn't identify but were apparently very valuable. Student Morrison, Dr. Kethmori said as he entered the classroom, I see your classmates continue to show their appreciation. Jake looked up at his professor, who no longer seemed terrified of him. The fear had been replaced by something that looked like respect mixed with amazement. Professor, this is getting ridiculous, Jake said, gesturing at the pile of gifts. Yesterday someone left me what I think was a small spaceship. Dr. Kethmori's compound eyes glittered with amusement. That was probably from the Mechanic Guild. They heard that humans casually coexist with ancient devourers and wanted to honor your courage. The door slid open, and Jake's classmates began filing in. But they didn't just walk to their seats like they used to. Each alien stopped at Jake's desk, made some sort of respectful gesture, and then carefully backed away to their own seating area. Zixithera's crystalline body glowed with warm golden light as she approached. Good morning, Jake the Brave, she said, her voice creating perfect musical harmony. "Just Jake is fine," he replied, feeling embarrassed by the new nickname that had somehow spread across the entire university. Bloom of Seven Suns approached, next her colors shifting through a pattern that Jake's translator identified as deep reverence. "Greetings, tamer of the ancient ones," Jake sighed. "I'm not a tamer. Hippos aren't tamed, we just try not to bother them." Kix hopped over on his single leg, all three eyes focused on Jake with something that looked like worship. "Master of the forbidden beasts," he said formally. "We are honored by your presence." "Guys, please," Jake said. "I'm just a regular human. Back on Earth, what I told you about hippos is basic stuff everyone learns in school." This statement caused the usual reaction. Every alien in the classroom stopped moving and stared at him in amazement. "Everyone learns this?" Dr. Kethmori asked quietly. "Sure. Kids learn about animals starting when they're really young. Hippos, elephants, lions, tigers, bears, sharks, crocodiles. All sorts of animals that live on Earth." Dr. Kethmori sat down heavily in his chair. "Student Morrison, perhaps you could save the discussion of other Earth fauna for another time." Jake nodded, remembering how mentioning elephants had caused another panic attack a few weeks ago. He still didn't understand why every Earth animal seemed to terrify the aliens, but he was learning to be more careful about what he said. The classroom door opened again, and someone Jake didn't expect walked in. It was Dean Zermoth, the head of the entire university. The tall, blue-skinned administrator rarely left his office, and Jake had never seen him in an actual classroom. "Dean Zermoth," Dr. Kethmori stood up quickly. "To what do we owe this honor?" The dean's forearms moved gracefully as he spoke. "I come with news for Student Morrison. The Galactic University Board of Directors has made a decision regarding his academic future." Jake felt his stomach drop. "Am I in trouble? Because I really didn't mean to cause all this chaos." Dean Zermoth's large eyes focused on Jake with an expression that might have been a smile. "Quite the opposite, Student Morrison. The board has voted unanimously to offer you the position of Director of Interspecies Survival Studies." Jake blinked. "Director of what now?" "A new department we are creating specifically around your area of expertise," the dean explained. "The study of how intelligent species can coexist with apex predators and environmental threats." "But I'm just a student," Jake protested. "I don't have any special expertise, I just grew up on Earth." Dr. Kethmori made that choking sound again. "Student Morrison, you grew up on a planet where creatures matching the exact description of ancient devourers live in your rivers. Your people not only survive alongside them but actually capture them for educational display. If that doesn't qualify as expertise in apex predator management, nothing does." "The Galactic Council has also made an official request," Dean Zermoth continued. "They would like Earth to host the new Center for Dangerous Species Research. Apparently, other worlds have been discovering creatures similar to historical threats, and they want to learn from humanity's unique approach to coexistence." Jake thought about this for a moment. "So because we live with hippos, everyone thinks we're experts at living with dangerous animals?" "Student Morrison," Dean Zermoth said seriously, "according to our historical records, no other species in galactic history has successfully shared a world with anything resembling ancient devourers. What your people consider normal is actually unprecedented." The classroom door opened once more and Captain Hayes walked in. She looked tired but pleased about something. "Jake," she said, "I have news from Earth. The president wants to speak. With you personally." "The president of what?" "The United States. And then the Secretary General of the United Nations. And then probably the leaders of most other countries." Captain Hayes sat down in an empty chair. "Your little hippo conversation has changed humanity's position in galactic politics." Jake looked around the room at all the faces watching him. "How?" "Three things," Captain Hayes said, counting on her fingers. "First, the Galactic Council has offered Earth a permanent seat on the Security Committee. They want our advice on handling dangerous wildlife situations. Second, 17 different worlds have requested that we send teams to help them deal with their own hippo problems. Apparently, several planets have animals that their populations consider threats, but which humans might be able to help them manage. And third, she smiled widely, Earth's tourism industry is about to become the most profitable business in the galaxy. Jake stared at her. Tourism? Jake, aliens are paying millions of credits for the chance to observe ancient devourers from a safe distance. We've had to start a lottery system just to decide which alien tourists get to visit Earth each month. Dr. Kethmori leaned forward eagerly. Captain Hayes, is it true that some humans actually swim in the same waters as the ancient devourers? Well, Captain Hayes said carefully, people do swim in rivers and lakes where hippos live, but it's not recommended. The entire classroom gasped in unison. And I heard, Sixthera chimed musically, that human children are taken to observe captive ancient devourers as part of their education. Field trips to the zoo are pretty common, yes. Another round of gasps echoed through the room. Jake held up his hands. Look, everyone, hippos really aren't that scary once you understand them. They're just big territorial animals that want to be left alone. Student Morrison, Dean Zermoth said solemnly, the fact that you can say that sentence with a straight face is exactly why the galaxy needs to learn from your people. Captain Hayes stood up. Jake, are you ready to become humanity's first ambassador of interspecies coexistence? Jake looked around the classroom one more time. His alien classmates watched him with expressions of awe and respect. Dr. Kethmori nodded encouragingly. Dean Zermoth waited patiently for his answer. Can I still take xenolinguistics classes? Jake asked. You can take any classes you want, Dean Zermoth assured him, though I suspect you'll be too busy. We've already received requests for consultation from 43 different worlds. Jake thought about his quiet life as an exchange student, which now seemed like it had happened years ago instead of weeks. Then he thought about Earth, where kids fed ducks in ponds that might contain snapping turtles, where people hiked in forests with bears and mountain lions, where farmers worked fields despite knowing that venomous snakes lived in the grass. Maybe the aliens had a point. Maybe humans really were unusual. All right, Jake said finally, but I have one condition. Everyone leaned forward expectantly. No one tells them about Australia. The silence that followed was the longest one yet.